Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 30th, 2019. This is almost it for 2019. What do we got today and tomorrow? And then we're on to 2020. And you know it's a big year, 2020. Olympics, for instance, 2020. So if you haven't joined the International Olympic Committee and been the recipient of any gigantic luxury bribes, you're running out of time. I don't think there's anything they can do for 2020, but maybe you want to get in on the action and help pick the site for, what are they up to? I guess maybe they have they not yet picked the 2008 Olympic site, or maybe that's already done, 2028. Maybe you can get in on the action ahead of time. Maybe you can join FIFA, and you can do it that way. Just sort of letting you know what your grifting opportunities are before we close out the year. Tomorrow will be our New Year's Eve show. Wednesday, New Year's Day, likely to be off the air on Wednesday. By the way, housekeeping, in all the possible senses. Next Wednesday the Wednesday after next, which will be the 7th or something like that, of January. This is like a bad luck streak. We haven't heard from Joan in a long time because of the holidays and her own vacation and other circumstances. And as it turns out, the following Wednesday is likely also that we'll be off the air. Only the fault will lie on this side of the microphone this time. And, we gotta take family to doctor's appointments once again. But we'll try and prepare for that Wednesday. And of course, there are always so many stories to get to that I'm thinking a little bit about maybe putting together something to listen to on New Year's Day. I'm going to go to the music store today, buy a pair of cymbals to just smash in the background during the entire thing. Do you guys get hangovers and headaches? I think maybe my demographic has stopped drinking heavily on New Year's Eve. Probably before we began the show, they were done with that. I don't know, but if you're drunk now, please call. Let us know. And if you're drunk and you've got 2 hours worth of material, or can help us select from the pile of material we haven't gotten to, then call in. Or if you're Greg Dworkin, you could do the same thing. Or Greg, start drinking. There's nothing that'll stop you at this point, right? You got nowhere, I don't know, maybe you have some errands to run to. Get an Uber. I say call the show drunk. That's something we haven't tried yet. Daily Co's Radio is drunk now. I think I'll just add that to Bill's morning tweet. Kagro X, that's me. Glug glug. Me and Matt Gates, we're out morning drinking. On the air for the next to last time in 2019. That's true. He knew right ahead of time we were even going to go this direction. I think that means we all get figgy pudding or something. I think that's probably true. I love that's one of my favorite lines in the Christmas carols. Especially, I hadn't really paid attention to that verse until, I don't know, about 10 years ago when I heard, I was probably listening to a Bing Crosby version of it, because this is 1950. And I guess I was listening to it, and I never really realized how insistent they were in that verse. It's supposed to be, I guess, jolly and whatnot, and everybody all in good fun saying that they should bring us some figgy pudding, but they're really super insistent. Bring us some figgy pudding. Bring it right here. Bring it now. What's wrong with you? I hate you. What? Calm down. The Trump carols. Maybe in the future, that's how caroling will go. I sing outside and you just bring me cash. That makes me smart. That could be what's in store for us. Let's see. Many things to catch up on, as I mentioned. And let's see. I see Greg's stories coming in, getting prepped in the background. We have Justice back at the controls after a brief visit with family last week. So congrats to him in completing the circuit and coming back. Glad to have you back at the controls. He tips me off each morning to some of the crazier stories as he's counting down, getting us ready for the show. This is an interesting one. I'm just going to, if you're still listening, Justice, today he tips me off. He usually makes some jokes joking references to what's in the news. He says, Rudy was spied on by TMZ. I don't know that story, although I can well imagine it having happened. But maybe you can tip me off to what that story is about, unless you're saving it for your own show. That's possible. Don't forget that the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up every day following our show. And it comes up even if I choke to death in the morning trying to get the news out to you. All right, maybe I should have that checked out by the doctor. Or again, still thinking I should not really get a voice coach or something like that. Give me some sort of morning routine that'll clear things up. I'm sure there's one out there too. Fisherman's Friend is good for suppressing the cough, but it's not doing much for keeping the throat clear. I don't know what exactly is doing that. I mean, what do I need? I mean, should I have a vaporizer going? Anybody have any idea? All right, maybe Greg knows, or maybe not, or maybe it's just unimportant and we can move on to other things. That's really what Greg is here for, to get us grounded and say, oh, by the way, fascinating, all of that, what you had for breakfast and what the kids are doing, but there is news. So good morning, Greg. Thanks for coming by.
Hey, it's pretty fascinating what you had for breakfast. Hopefully it wasn't just like 50 proof.
No, it is cholesterol-blasting oatmeal.
Good. So here we are, Sober Monday. Mm-hmm. And, lots happening, of course. It's relatively quiet, though. Again, it's the period, sort of the dead zone between the holidays. So there isn't quite as much political news as normal, except, of course, Trump hates a vacuum. Trump abhors a vacuum.
He might not even let them vacuum his apartment.
Yeah, he hires people from Mexico to do it and then lies about it. But the whole idea is that Nancy Pelosi withholding the impeachment articles is just driving him bonkers.
He was already bonkers.
And he's rage tweeting just about every day. I haven't looked at today's, but he was certainly doing it yesterday. Trying to make a case that somehow Nancy Pelosi is a scandalous person because one of her family members, large extended family, did X or Y or Z or something. Oh, my gosh, it's just like Joe Biden.
How did you something besides go to church?
I don't know. It's just so hard to know. And she basically just, she's Mark Hamill in the Star Wars, trilogy, just sort of brushing it off her shoulder. Oh. And it makes no difference. And so he gets even more frustrated. So this is from Kevin Robillard. He says on Twitter, a protester at town hall in Milford, New Hampshire, yells at Biden, "How much did you make from Ukraine?" And Biden said, "I've released 20 years of my tax returns. Your guy hasn't released one. What's he hiding?" Huge applause from the crowd. After some back and forth between the protester and other people in the crowd, Biden adds, "Let him go. He's an idiot." And it just reminds me so much of Barney Frank. Ma'am, you have the intelligence of a table. I'm not discussing this with you. I mean, that's the proper way to do a town hall,
Yes, well, I know you've always appreciated that. I always wondered where he came up with table. There's so many other furniture pieces but I mean, I don't think that tables are particularly intelligent. That was an interesting one.
Well, there's a table of as strong as a rock, dumb as a tree. It's all
those I've heard of. A table. Okay, well. He thinks outside the box.
It's the refined, artisanal version of that comment. But, it's the background is still the same. I've been following this MSN tracking poll. David Rothschild conducts this, and you can follow him on Twitter. He always has interesting things to say about polling, so this is kind of online polling. And the support or oppose the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office, support for that is 55, and oppose is 40. So, it's been growing over the holiday. Whereas the approval-disapproval for Trump is pretty steady. The approve is steady at 44. The disapproval has dropped to 50. So, in other words, as the approve-disapprove numbers stay the same or even favor Trump just a little bit, presumably economic news, the support for removing Trump via the Senate, that sentiment grows. And I'm using the wording, do you support or oppose the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office? Because I'm getting more and more convinced that actually people don't really know what impeachment is anyway.
Yeah.
And so if you
That's
tell
true.
them what impeachment is without using the I word, you get better numbers than if you just say, do you think the president should be impeached? Does that mean he gets, thrown in jail? I don't think he should be thrown in jail for this.
Oh, I
I just
do.
want him removed. Oh, well, that's impeachment. Oh, well, I didn't know that.
Well,
What are you?
convenient.
I'm a libertarian. What does that mean? Well, I support libraries.
As long as they're
If you
for
don't
me.
totally explain exactly what it is that you're talking about, you can't assume that the public knows.
Impeachment in particular. I mean, that's a tough one.
It's not something we do all the time.
No, and even though we've done it more often lately than usual, it's still, you find that people don't know.
Now, the assertion I'm making that it's all about poll wording, I don't know that. I'm just saying it brings up an interesting question that I don't think has been answered.
Well, why not poll like that? It
But the
makes sense.
pollsters that I'm online with say, yeah, that could have something to do with it. Absolutely.
Sure.
So, there's something there. It should be studied. I like that. I like studying things.
Yes.
Let me give you,
Judiciously,
to
as
start
you
off
will.
with, I have to mention John Lewis, of course. It's just inconceivable, as Vizzini would say, to think about the House without John Lewis. But, at some point the House is going to be without John Lewis.
This is true, yes.
And it doesn't necessarily mean because he's just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is very individualized. You can't look at somebody and say, oh, that happened to them, and therefore this is going to happen here. It's all different. And, of course, whenever people give you information online or with news analysis, it's just about never actually with the medical record. So we know he has stage 4, but we don't quite know what that means. Does that mean he has metastases? Does that mean that he has a tumor that's very close to a blood vessel? I mean, all the things that matter in terms of how you treat it are unknowns, and therefore you can't really pontificate about what it all means. But in general, when people say they have stage 4 pancreatic cancer or late stage pancreatic cancer, what they're trying to say is it doesn't seem to be surgically resectable, and therefore there'll be some sort of chemoradiation treatment for it, and then we'll see how it goes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have enough experience with cancer treatments to know. Stage 4 makes it. I have no parallel. I think it's like hurricanes.
There's no
It's
stage 5
very
or
bad.
stage 6.
Okay.
So stage 4 is the last stage.
I see.
And you don't want that. But generally speaking,
Well, no.
this isn't discovered at stage 1. So
Pancreatic cancer.
most of the time, it's not a good thing to have. He's a fighter. We all know that, and we all know people who have had a remission. So it happens, and so we'll just leave it at that.
All right. I mean,
Never tell me the odds.
Seems like particularly if it's that individualized, as you put it, there's just no way to know. And okay, so we wait.
So we
He
wait,
fights,
but
we wait.
not good news. And it's I started seeing people saying nice things about John Lewis yesterday before I got the news. They had seen it before I did, and of course my first thought is, oh my goodness, why are people saying nice things about John Lewis? What happened?
Oh yes, well,
And then you follow it and you find out what happened.
yeah,
That's how we get our news these days.
right. Somebody's name trends, and you say
Somebody's name trending. So
either
why
happy
is that name
birthday
trending? What does that
or
mean?
rest in peace. Yeah.
What does this mean? What does this all mean? I understand why Rachel asks that all the time. Rachel Manna.
Oh well.
What does this mean? Well, let's find out what this means.
It's a
So
good way
let's
of
ask
handling
about
things.
something else and see what that means.
Okay.
This is a piece from G.
Didn't mean
Elliott
to ask
Morris.
that. Oh, we know what
Democratic
that's
voters
gonna mean.
might be more loyal to their party than they were in 2016. That's kind of good news. Concerns about far-left and anti-establishment voters supporting Republican and third-party candidates are overblown. Now, that comes, I think, for two reasons that he's writing about it. One is Tulsi Gabbard, and the other is Bernie Sanders. Some people argue that supporters of Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign cost Hillary Clinton the White House by voting for opponent Donald Trump. Personally,
There are
I'm not
people
of
who do
that
that.
school. I don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe that is I personally blame James Comey.
Yes, well, if you can find something else to blame, sure, do that.
But I mean, obviously multifactorial, and many things happen in perfect storm. Although these concerns are overblown, Democrats and Republicans don't always vote 100% for the party anyway, and it's impossible to know what other events could have determined the outcome of the election. James Comey. It is nonetheless true that small changes in voting behavior can make big differences in close campaigns. I still blame Ralph Nader, actually. So wrote political science professor John Sines in 2017, an analysis of a different 2008 survey by the political scientists Michael Henderson, Sunshine Hilgus, and Trevor Thompson. I love that name, Sunshine. Produced a similar estimate, 25%. Unsurprisingly, Clinton voters who supported McCain were more likely to have negative views of African Americans relative to those who supported Obama. Can you imagine? Thus, the 6% or 12% of Sanders supporters who may have supported Trump doesn't look especially large in comparison with these other examples. Was that enough to cause Clinton's support in key states? That's a huge hypothetical. Clinton's losses in the Rust Belt, which cost her an electoral college majority, can be attributed to many factors. And a lot depends on the exact number of Sanders supporters who didn't vote for her. Yes. Schaffner generated some state-level estimates, which G. Elliott Morris, the guy we're reading from, he's quoting Sides right now, quickly noted were large enough to exceed Trump's margin of victory in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, even if we assume the overall percentage of Sanders supporters who voted for Trump was 6 and not 12. Assume, therefore, we can cut through every state estimate in half. The estimated number of Sanders-Trump voters would still exceed Trump's margin of victory, but attach a lot of caveats to that analysis. It's hard to know how many Sanders-Trump voters there were, whether they really cost Clinton the election, and it doesn't appear that many of them were predisposed to support Clinton in the first place. So if you were there, and we were, and watched what was going on, which we did, I have news for the listening public. A lot of Sanders supporters really didn't like Hillary Clinton.
That was the basis of his candidacy in the beginning, yeah.
Voters' predisposition, writes G. Elliott Morris, against the Democratic establishment is also a relevant question for 2020. If voters that support some candidates are not willing to vote for others in the general, one could make an argument that those candidates need to do more to encourage them to be party loyalists, if indeed winning an election is a party's ultimate goal. So, looking at survey data already, it seems 2020 is going to be different than 2016. Supporters of Yang, Gabbard do not look like typical Democrats. Supporters of the party's major nominees mostly look more loyal than they did last time around. For example, 97% of Elizabeth Warren's voters say they'll vote Democratic in November. So do 94% of Biden voters, 87% of Sanders voters. And that's much higher than the 75% of Bernie's coalition that cast ballots for Clinton in 2016. So which Democratic voters are potentially the most disloyal? Here's the percentage of each candidate's base who say they'll vote Democratic in the 2020 general. Okay. Warren, 97. Steyer, 96. Biden, 94. Klobuchar, 93. Buttigieg, 92. Sanders, 87. Bloomberg, 82. Booker, 80. Yang, 73. Now, which one is not like the others? Gabbard, 15.
That's because, are we certain that they interviewed actual humans and individuals for Gabbard even? I mean, they got the results they were looking for, I guess.
Well, I bet they
shocked
robot, as you, that's probably the YouGov survey from The Economist that G. Elliott Morris overlooks. This is not all too surprising. As political polarization has increased over the past few decades, the number of split-ticket voters has dropped. We naturally expect that Democrats and Republicans will be loyal to the nominee that their party selects regardless. And that's the role of parties. After all, to me, to G. Elliott Morris, this all suggests that some narratives about the dangers posed by far-left and anti-establishment candidates is overblown. In 2016, 90 to 95% of Democrats and Republicans cast ballots for the party's candidate in the general election. So far, it looks like that number might even be higher this time around. So don't freak out about Tulsi Gabbard going third party. Tulsi Gabbard is just an odd person.
Yes.
A rara avis, an odd bird.
Yes, to say the least. And I guess just to be sure we make note of this, if she does do that, Hillary Clinton was right and everybody laughed at her and she was right again.
At the same time, yes. We have, who was it, Abercrombie, Doug Abercrombie, the previous
Neil Abercrombie.
Governor of Hawaii?
Yes.
Suggesting the fact that Tulsi Gabbard never shows up to any of her votes.
Oh?
That
happens when you're out.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And, she's kind of intimated that maybe, she's too busy getting paid by Putin to really, do her job.
I guess that's
there's
possible.
An incredible amount of animosity towards Gabbard amongst Democrats, which spiked after she refused to vote for impeachment.
Yes. Well, that was some plan she had there, present. It got her a lot of attention. I think that's what it was supposed to do, and she's not taking the job particularly
Neil
seriously.
Abercrombie, who led the state from 2010 to 2014, personally phoned Gabbard, who isn't seeking re-election, before he went public with his call for her resignation at a news conference in Hawaii. His biggest complaint is that as she runs for president, she's been largely absent from Congress.
Yeah.
Okay, I left a detailed message for her. I'm sure she pays attention to her voicemail, he said.
Okay. He's been in Congress. He knows that's
He
not
is.
the
He's a
case.
former
He's
congressman.
kidding.
Trying to do my job in Washington, run for office in Hawaii was just too difficult. I couldn't do it. I had hoped maybe I could do it, and it became obvious I couldn't, so I resigned my seat.
Yeah. That's a hell of a trip.
Right. Gabbard's congressional office indicated she would continue to serve in Congress, crediting her for securing major legislative wins for Hawaii this session, such as improving reporting on Red Hill aquifer protection and helping veterans impacted by toxic burn pits. So it's perhaps, he's supporting somebody who's running against her, so It's not surprising. But it's just interesting. Quite honestly, it's hard to figure out what game Gabbard is playing here, says Doug Mataconis, a conservative I follow.
Okay.
Some have theorized she was positioning herself to be the next Jill Stein and run for Green Party candidacy. If that's the case, she's going about it in rather odd ways by taking on positions that aren't going to endear her to voters from that party, especially when it comes to impeachment. Maybe she has no plans for a political future, and maybe she's just a gadfly. Whatever it is, it's quite odd. And I think, if you look up odd in the dictionary, there's a picture of
that?
Tulsi.
No. Oh, well, then she's famous. She's got what she came for.
Exactly. So she's kind of odd in that way. Anyway, I think that's all interesting background for what's going on here. And the back and forth with Biden is also interesting. Don't forget, there's still, quote, controversy, end quote, about Biden's comments about subpoenaed and being subpoenaed for the Senate trial.
I forgot already.
This is one of these things that partisans get all hot
great.
under the collar, but like ordinary people listening to this just kind of shrug their shoulders. It's hard to know, because it's Joe Biden, exactly what he meant.
Right.
He seems to have meant that, of course, he always follows the law. It's just that this is stupid.
Right. The lawyers will straighten
But he didn't just say that.
No.
What he said is, I'm not going to respond to the subpoena. What about law and order? I said, I'm all for law and order. I've always followed law and order. This is just dumb.
I love law and order.
Well, no. He didn't say that either. What he said was, I'm not going to respond. And that opened the door to, if you don't respond, we don't have to respond. Everything is bad, you know, and you're just like them, and everything's the same.
I mean, that's
and when that happens,
true.
you just throw up your hands and say, look, it doesn't matter what you say. Whatever it is you say, somebody's going to take this and run with this. And let me give you an example of taking and run with it, what I think is far more pithy.
Okay.
Full of pith, and a lot more important
off.
than the Biden nonsense. And that is Maya Wiley commenting, Trump is retweeting brand new Twitter accounts he shouldn't even know exist.
Yeah.
There's a whole thread, explosive here, on Trump retweeting fake Twitter accounts favored by Russian troll farms to expose alleged whistleblower. And this raises more troubling questions. So let's take a look at that actual.
Okay. I saw a lot of discussion of that. Brandon Friedman, a friend, did that as well.
This is Mike
Slightly
Farb
different.
that I'm looking at. Trump is amplifying his attacks using Twitter. Let's look at accounts he's interacting with. Many of these interactions do not appear to be organic. Here's the account he retweeted that exposed the alleged identity of the whistleblower. This is troubling. Somebody named Sophia Jones, surfer mom.
Ooh, like Tulsi.
Right. In 2013, it was a historian. In 2015, Sophie Jones is now an educator and image model.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, me too.
And the same account in 2018 claims to be Yvonne, not Sophia. But by 2019 doesn't have a profile description. It's the same account. Notice the images continue to look a lot different. One of the most notable oddities to this account is the early interactions. Here you can see it's linked to tagged other accounts. Like, this is going to make Hillary scream. The greatest global Trump and ad deplorables unite. The highlighted account is particularly interesting, not just because it's been suspended. Somebody named Lodi Silverado. Lodi Silverado wasn't the only GRU-IRA favorite, those are Russian troll farms, that this account is linked to. The Suler also was a top 10 retweet for the GRU-IRA trolls. And then goes on and talks about individual accounts here, which don't seem to be real people, that somehow Trump discovers 24 hours after they pop into existence and then starts retweeting because it says something he likes. So the questions, of course, that it raises is he, again, coordinating with the Russians in order to try to screw up the elections?
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
Right.
And that's why he was impeached. And so, even if you don't understand what the I word is, people kind of get that.
Yes.
Now, here's some interesting commentary from a person that I follow, Jared Yates Sexton.
Yes, okay. We've heard his name.
Okay. He's
following him too. I don't know. Yeah.
He's an author, political analyst, associate professor of creative writing, and basically has done some really interesting things like go to Trump rallies.
Oh, well.
We've had friends who've done that too.
Yes.
And it's just interesting to
Still
hear.
alive.
He was there early on for some of the first ones and talked about how ominous and dark they were and proto-fascistic. And so, interesting guy to follow. And he says, my conversations with Trump supporters, this is December 28th, so recent, have changed recently. After initial pushback, they're admitting he's too concerned with himself, that he's a volatile rich guy helping other rich guys. They admit he's a weapon, but they're tiring of him. The Trump supporters I'm talking to, I have this in the roundup, by the way, today.
Great.
Have all supported him without question, but for his bragging about the market, they're not seeing any differences. They're tired of his whole act and admit when they feel safe that they know he committed crimes with the Ukraine call. You're not going to see the Trump cultists, the ones who've wrapped their identities around him, the ones who need him as a culture warrior. But the ones who saw him as a populist who would fight for him, they're shifting, and they're wide open for the taking.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
For anyone who follows me, I'm skeptical about the political moment. But I'm saying he can be beaten, he can be blown out. It's just about messaging and appeals.
Oh, I hope so. People are making that observation, and I think our friend Stephen Andrew, as a matter of fact, made a similar observation this morning. He's just seeing that shift among at least a certain percentage of them. We'll talk more about it in 2 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, Greg, ready for another segment? Or are we still? We could continue on this one for a long time.
Let's just finish this off, and then I'll talk about one more thing, and then go.
Sir, you could stay after, but it's up to you.
I'm going to go.
Oh, all right. Not now.
Not now.
Okay.
So you talk about our friend Stephen Andrew.
I did. You want me to do some more? Oh, okay. Well, he said, because you gave me the tweet here, thank you for digging that up for me. He had made a similar anecdotal observation, and he says so right up front. I don't have much in the way of data to validate it, but it sure feels like Trump voters, at least some of them, are tiring of his act. They'll inject little things into the conversation like, I know he's an idiot, or, yeah, he's an arrogant a-hole, or whatever, and they didn't used to do that so much. And, there were always people. I think the old excuse that people used to give was, I hate that he tweets so much, or I wish he would be, less confrontational in his tweeting. But so this has grown to a slightly different admission and with a slightly different pool of people. It doesn't prove anything. There's certainly no data, but it's a well-taken observation. I hope and it doesn't have to be that many people in order for it to make a difference, as you've told us a number of times.
Right. So I hope it sticks. So for my last piece here, I'm going to look at Business Insider.
All right.
Because I just thought it was interesting. It's a nice thing to end with.
Insider.
Okay. It's more about getting into Trump's head.
All right.
The title, Trump is Powerless. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is doing to the president what no one else has in the 3 years since he took office.
Okay.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's making President Donald Trump squirm. Pelosi's refusal to transmit the articles of impeachment against Trump to the Senate has robbed the president of what he wants most, total and complete exoneration following a trial. Asked about Trump's mindset in recent days, one Republican strategist in frequent contact with the White House told Insider Trump was incensed about impeachment because he believes it undermines his political prowess. The strategist said Trump was angry because he's Donald Trump.
Well, yeah.
Because the allegations against him suggest, quote, he needs outside help to win an election, that he can't do it on his own. He thinks that's BS, end quote. Of course, it's not BS. That's how he won the first time, and that's how he plans to do it the second time. That's why he's retreating all of these Russian troll farm accounts. The strategist said Trump was angry because the allegations against him suggest he needs outside help. A person who was close to Trump's legal team during the Russia probe also told Insider the cascade of witness testimony, more than anything else, grated on the president's nerves. For a man who puts personal loyalty above everything else, this was something he never saw coming, the person said. He couldn't stop them, so he decided to smear them. But at the end of the day, all he could do is sit back and watch it happen. And so with that as background, there was this really fascinating story in the New York Times, which they've already taken off the front page online, about the 84 days of how the Ukraine thing came about, one of those background stories.
Okay.
Which basically was trying to defend Pompeo and Mulvaney. They're obviously the selected leakers that they don't identify. That somehow or other we tried to stop him. You know, and again, the purpose of those stories is generally to try to exonerate themselves because they know something big is happening and they can't just simply blow it off and say, get over it, which is what Mulvaney's approach was.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, after all, here's the story. Behind the Ukraine aid freeze, 84 days of conflict and confusion. Mike Pompeo still wants to run for Senate in Kansas.
Yeah.
So you can't just leave and say, okay, well, I'm not talking about it. It's not an issue. Nothing happened. Let's go on. Let's just pretend I'm the normal candidate for a Senate seat. The fact of the matter is that this is more trying to dump Rudy Giuliani under the bus and trying to make him the fall guy. And Giuliani keeps speaking, so that doesn't really help any. I mean, it's gotten to the point where Lindsey Graham said, geez, I hope what Giuliani's bringing to us isn't all Russian propaganda.
Yes.
Well, duh.
He has that. Well, it is, but yeah, it's a nice thing to hope. I would hope that if I were him.
Right.
It means he's
the New York
still alive
Times basically
in there.
says straight up, the Democratic-led inquiry into Mr. Trump's dealings with Ukraine this spring and summer established that the president was actively involved in parallel efforts, secretive and highly unusual, to bring pressure on a country he viewed with suspicion, if not disdain. One campaign spearheaded by Rudy Giuliani, the other, which unfolded nearly simultaneously but has gotten less attention, was the president's demand to withhold the security assistance. By late summer, the two efforts merged as American diplomats used the withheld aid as leverage in the effort to win a public commitment to carry out the investigations Mr. Trump sought.
Yes. I mean, okay. I'm not sure by what calculation that got less attention, but I guess it could have from some people.
Right. Interviews with dozens of current and former administration officials, congressional aides, and others previously undisclosed emails and documents, and a close reading of thousands of pages of impeachment testimony provide the most complete account yet of the 84 days from when Mr. Trump first inquired about the money to his decision in September to relent. And Mr. Mulvaney is shown to have been deeply involved as a key conduit for transmitting Mr. Trump's demands for the freeze across the administration.
Yes.
So basically,
jobs.
it just sounds like everybody knows Rudy Giuliani's in the middle of this, but people have lost focus on the fact that Mulvaney wasn't just covering for Trump. Mulvaney was involved totally with this.
Yes.
Was 100% in.
That's right.
Was trying to get it done, which is very different than, I don't know why you're involving me. I just did what the president said.
Yes. Okay. Now I get the point. That's what got less attention is Mulvaney's involvement. And that's true. I don't know how you could overlook that. I mean, I was reminded on During last week, and then I think I read it on Friday, somebody pointed that out. That's the reason that Mulvaney continues to hold on to both jobs. It's one of the only
it's basically what happened is
Trump
stepped back in crime boss fashion. And maybe we should cover the David Frum piece that says there's a gangster in the White House. Those carrying out Trump's orders on the aid were, for the most part, operating in different lanes from those seeking the investigation. So he said to Sondland and Volker and Giuliani, go put pressure on them to get what I want. Separately, without even talking to them, he says to Mulvaney, make sure the aid's cut off. That way, Volker and Sondland can say, I don't know what's going on. All I know is you need to do this.
Yes, although they did say that they seem to have been tipped off to the...
Well, they knew, but they didn't have first-hand account.
So what? But okay.
Well, yeah, exactly. So what? But that's their line. Well, I wasn't directly told by the president he was withholding aid. Right. That was Mulvaney's job.
Right. Well, take that to an Article 3 court and see if it helps. That's not where this is happening.
But that's what this is.
Yes, I mean that's the analog people use to understand these things, is think about courtroom proceedings. And I've heard of hearsay. I'm not sure what it is, but I've heard of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Mulvaney is said by associates to have stepped out of the room whenever Mr. Trump would talk with Mr. Giuliani. Yet testimony before the House suggests a different picture. Fiona Hill told the impeachment inquiry about a July 10th White House meeting with Mr. Sondland, said Mr. Mulvaney had guaranteed Mr. Zelensky would be invited to the White House if the Ukrainians agreed to the investigations, the drug deal that Mr. Bolton described. And Mulvaney and Mr. Blair have declined to cooperate with impeachment investigators and provide information to Congress under oath, an intensifying point of friction. So the thing that's bringing it into focus is the fact that Mulvaney is in the middle of it. And by the way, he's refusing to testify. Yes. So, they can talk about all they want that, well, there's no first-hand evidence. Well, but now the focus is on the fact, okay, these guys obviously have first-hand evidence. Why aren't they testifying? That's not the direction they want to go. But that's where it's going. And that's why you have the Lisa Murkowski's of the world saying, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that, we're not totally neutral here.
Yes. By the way, how do you prevent anyone from getting first-hand evidence? How do you get the message from Trump's head to the people who need to execute it without anyone having first-hand knowledge of what his demands are and still get the message correctly to OMB? And the answer is, if your White House chief of staff is also nominally still the head of OMB, he doesn't have to tell anyone else what he heard in the White House. The same guy gets to carry the message.
My left side of the brain talks to my right side of the brain, and now all of a sudden I know. I don't even have to say it out loud.
Now you know why the most ridiculous thing
and there's no paper
ever happened.
Go ahead,
right. Yeah, there's no reason in the world why he should be
chief of staff. I spoke to OMB head.
Right.
Prove it.
Right. You can't, because it's the same guy. And that's never happened before, and now we know why it did happen. It's not that he can't come up with other people to head OMB. It's that he needs to be able to carry those messages without writing them down.
Right. So here's the gist of the David Frum, too long didn't read. A gangster in the White House, the president tweeted the name of the presumed whistleblower in the Ukraine scandal, demonstrating that he's unrepentant and determined to break the law again.
Yes. He just doesn't think it applies to him.
Right. Amid a 2-day binge of post-Christmas rage tweeting, President Donald Trump retweeted the name of the CIA employee widely presumed to be the whistleblower in the Ukraine scandal. On Thursday night, Trump retweeted his campaign account, which had tweeted a link to a Washington Examiner article that printed the name. And then in the early hours Friday morning, he retweeted a suspect supporter, who named the presumed whistleblower in the text of the tweet. Lawyers debate whether the naming of the federal whistleblower is itself illegal. Federal law forbids inspectors general to disclose the names, but the law isn't explicit about disclosure by anybody else in government. You heard that from the Yelly Jim Jordans of the world during the impeachment hearings. Okay. But what the law does forbid is retaliation against a whistleblower, and a coordinated campaign of vilification by the president's allies and the president himself surely amounts to retaliation in any reasonable understanding of the term. So what Frum is saying is, look, whatever you want to say about whether or not you're allowed to use the name, if Trump uses it, it's like prima facie evidence that he's trying to intimidate. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing it.
Really, nothing he says that isn't aimed at intimidating someone.
Donald Trump will not be bound by any rule even after he's been caught. He's unrepentant, determined to break the rules again, in part by punishing those who try to enforce them. He's a president with the mind of a gangster, and as long as he's in office, he'll head a gangster White House. That's his conclusion. It's a short piece. But the point is that, interference with the election? Of course he did it before. He's doing it now. Of course he's going to do it again.
Yes.
I mean, he's proving the point just about every day he tweets. How do we know? Because he's retweeting Russian troll farms.
Yeah. There was an interesting explanation in that thread you kind of that you shared with us earlier that there's really is no reason. How could the president of the United States? He's not really.
He's
doing
so
any
busy,
of the work. Right? But he's so busy
even
that
if he's busy playing
finding
golf.
Unknown accounts that just started yesterday that didn't even tweet about him. That's one of the interesting things. You can't even really lay it at the feet of, they said something flattering about Trump and he scans Twitter for people saying nice things about him. I don't think he's got the patience to do that. No one would. But they don't even mention him in many cases. They just say something that he needs for his case. And if he's scouring Twitter for these things, then, for one thing, he's not working. For another thing, that means you can indict him, by the way. The memo always says you can't indict a sitting president because they're too damn busy. He's obviously not. But, even if he has staff doing it, it's, leveraging his name to put all that out there. I mean, that might not bother him and it might not distract from what he's supposed to be doing. But somebody is getting tipped off as to where you can find this ridiculous nonsense faster than Twitter can delete it as a bot. And that's troubling, to say the least. Okay.
To say the least. Anyway, that's the story. That's all I got today.
Oh, all right.
You're on your own.
Okay.
See you Thursday.
Nothing left. Okay, very good.
I'll see you next year.
That's right. I know. I used to love saying that when I was a kid, and I rarely have the chance now, except here. So we can do that. Okay. I will see you next year. Well, actually, I won't. I mean, I'll hear you anyway, and then hopefully I will see you.
We'll talk next year.
Good enough for me. I'll take it. Okay. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. And that's a great roundup and a good start for today. All right. Let's see. Where next? Well, one big struggle with the throat there, and then on to the next. Let's see. We can run down the Twitter account to figure out what happened over the weekend. I have a few items that I added. I tend to I sort items out between big stuff that has to be read and discussed. That goes in the pocket folder. And little things that happened and that really influenced the way I'm thinking, but don't rise to the level of a long read that needs to be shared and analyzed, end up in the Twitter feed for the weekend. But let's see. I have this to say about what Joe Biden had to say about the subpoenas. This is an important thing because we've spent a lot of time on the show and elsewhere discussing the importance of honoring congressional subpoenas. And so, with that in mind, yes, I have to agree. I can't come to the conclusion that he didn't say a dumb thing about subpoenas. My only excuse for the whole thing is he says dumb things off the cuff. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't support him for president. Initially, if you're going to make your selection from among the 450 people running for nomination still, he wouldn't be at the top of a lot of people's list, and that would be one of the reasons. That's all there is to it. I mean, that's the simple version of it. Now, when I saw it happen, I said, all right, well, that's a huge mistake. His lawyers will fix it. They will come around, and see him within a couple of hours and say, yeah, that was the wrong thing to say. It undermines the impeachment effort against Donald Trump, and his supporters will pick up on that and echo it endlessly. On the other hand, I guess I also thought, well, that's true. Now there's almost no point in fixing it because they'll just fixate on the first tweet, the first comments, and just forever pretend that that's your position, so there's nothing you can do about it. But for the rest of it, there's a margin for whom, among Democratic voters, who you can still sway back and recapture if they were ever yours in the first place, or placate if they weren't, by saying, oh, no, what I meant was, and perhaps only for, or maybe uniquely, let's say, in a unique fashion for Joe Biden, there's room. There's baked into the Joe Biden cake is yeah, he sometimes says dumb things, and that's not a good thing to, you don't want to, you wouldn't want to pick him for your first choice for president if you're, let's say, the kind of person who says, I like presidents who don't say dumb things, okay? I like to use the Donald Trump phrasing on that. But you don't want to be like Donald Trump. I'm already too much like Donald Trump. You don't want to do more to be like Donald Trump, right? You want to be a forgiving, understanding, logical Democrat who believes in redemption, although maybe you're tired of allowing opportunities for Joe Biden to have his redemption. That's an understandable position too. But I basically thought, all right, the lawyers are going to fix this thing. Also, it's not all that likely to happen. I mean, we're still really basically looking at a situation where, for all the talk about it, and there's been lots happening that has prolonged the discussion period for what's happening with impeachment. But for all the discussion, for all the attention being paid to that class of Republican senators who still can convince people to report stories about them with mentions that they're moderates. They are not. But with mentions that they're moderates, who are saying that they're troubled, and that's the right thing to say, but I don't know if it really is true necessarily. Bottom line is McConnell still gets to run the trial pretty much the way he wants to. Everybody who says, well, if he had his votes locked up, he could simply come out and say so and reveal what's going to happen with the trial no matter what right now is correct. And he may have work to do in getting people around to the position where, or negotiating for people or with people their positions for, I need the independents to be able to say, I'm deeply troubled before I cast the vote you want. He's got to work all that out. So that is all true. And there's lots of other theories floating, like maybe McConnell secretly does want Trump gone, but he needs to walk this tightrope in such a way that it looks like he's defending Trump so that he can't be singled out and blamed for ditching Trump when he does ditch Trump. And this is how you would do something like that. And that's not beyond the pale either. I mean, remember that remember there was a long period of time, a considerable amount of time, during which Trump tweeted daily how much he hated McConnell and what a jerk he thought he was, and what an impediment to Trumpism McConnell would be if he were returned to the Senate. And then, of course, the reality became, look, he's going to be the candidate for Senate there. You want Republican control of the Senate, you're going to have to come around and support him. And McConnell is going to become easier for you to support because for the first half of your presidency, his job is going to be doing those things that you two can come to agreement on: conservative judges and drastic tax cutting. Lots of stories on that, by the way, and the New York Times also out with a roundup of basically what a disaster, a bigger disaster than previously anticipated by, I guess, dumb people who thought that maybe Trump's tax cuts weren't going to be quite as disastrous as they turned out to be, but then they did turn out to be even more disastrous than anybody thought, except for people who know what giant tax cuts mean in a situation like this. They were right, and the establishment was wrong, and, what else is new? But anyway, it's been real interesting to watch the dynamics and to guess about what's going on. But they used to hate one another pretty obviously. So could there be maybe a secret plot or secret thread anyway in McConnell's mind? He's always considering everything. Any possibility to hold on to power, to accrue more power. And so I'm sure he's weighed his options there, but I don't know if it means anything. But I guess to get us back to the original point, whatever the hell that was, all of this was going to happen anyway, by the way. Pelosi's withholding of the articles of impeachment has not, to date, affected the timeline anticipated by the Senate for the trial. And it may never impact it, depending on just how outside the box McConnell is willing to be on things. And we've demonstrated in recent history that he will go way outside the box if he thinks there's advantage in it for him. And so, we early on said, I don't know that he'll necessarily follow the rules with respect to receiving those articles of impeachment. Ordinarily, you really can't operate without getting those articles sent from the House to the Senate. But with, if you lock up your 51 votes, you can do pretty much whatever the hell you want. And he can have the trial and not only have it any way he wants, have it any time he wants, whether he gets those articles or not, if you really want to push things. But what I was going to say was no matter what Nancy Pelosi is doing now, the trial wasn't ever anticipated to start any sooner than the second week in January anyway. And we're not there yet. And so we don't know exactly what the Senate's going to do yet and what he's been able to lock up in terms of votes yet. So, whether had she sent the articles of impeachment immediately, this cuts both ways for all the Republican complaints about the articles not having been sent and how it's illegal, or it doesn't mean that he's been impeached, or it's unconstitutional, or whatever dumb crap they come up with to keep their arguments relevant. That trial wasn't going to start whether she sent it right away or whether she's still holding on to them, so no impact there. And you should remember that if all of a sudden things turn on a dime when the new year rolls over and the Senate comes back in the second week of January, or the first full week of January, and just begins their process, and everybody says, well, what happened? I thought that her withholding the articles meant that there wasn't going to be a trial until we heard what the rules were going to be. That's the aim, but it might not be what turns out to happen. Or, it might work just that way. And middle ground here, it may work just that way. And then at which point McConnell says, all right, you want to know what the ground rules for the trial are going to be? No witnesses, just like everybody thought I was going to say. And other unfair crap that isn't going to result in a fair trial, but instead is going to be rigged in favor of Donald Trump and Republicans. At which point, it's again entirely possible that don't get too into it. If I don't think anybody here is inclined to get too into like hero worship of Nancy Pelosi. Oh my God, she's saving the republic with this one simple move, one simple trick to restore democracy. It may or may not be the aim of what she's doing at the moment, but again, so let's say it comes around and McConnell says the rules are there's going to be no witnesses. And Pelosi says, all right, well, then I'm not sending you the articles of impeachment just yet. And he says, well, I'm starting the trial anyway. Oh, well, maybe that didn't save the republic after all. Or maybe she begins to realize that he says he's got the votes to begin the trial anyway. So is it any longer to our advantage to hold on to the articles of impeachment? Maybe not. So, and then people say, well, don't cave. And, and I guess at some point we'll start to hear legal arguments about whether or not the House position vis-a-vis their House managers changes. Do we have more or less leverage to send the managers that we want or don't want, or is that even possible for them to block our managers? Imagine getting into that constitutional gray area. I don't know how that fight even starts, much less how it comes out. So it is possible that we may find that in the end McConnell announces exactly what he said he was going to announce in the first place, and the articles of impeachment get dispatched nonetheless. I understand that there's a tactical advantage right now, holding on to them, and apparently it's driving Trump up the wall, and they may not be able to get through to him mentally that it doesn't really matter. You shouldn't be flying off the handle like this. They may get through to him mentally, and he may think, there might be a cagey operator at some level in that skull of his where he may say, yeah, well, I think there's a tactical advantage in my flying off the handle about this right now. And no one else can see it, and we still don't, and we may never quite understand it, but he may think that that's the case. That may be why he's doing what he's doing. Anyway, all of this happened in the context of, I guess I said I was going to get back to the original point, which I think the original point was about Joe Biden saying what he said. I basically took the position that, one, his lawyers will come back around and say, no, you can't say that. You have to say, what I meant was that I'll take the subpoena seriously, but I will fight against having to comply with it. I will make a legal case why the subpoena ought to be, if it was in court, you might say, quashed. And there's good reason why it might be in an ordinary trial sense. But again, we're not operating there. And the thing he ought to have said is, look, I really don't have, everyone in America knows that I don't have any real testimony to offer that's relevant to the impeachment of Donald Trump. They're making it up. If the Senate issues a valid subpoena and we go through all the process to decide whether or not it's something I have to comply with, and the judge's opinion comes back that says that I have to, then I'll have to. I'm not afraid of anything. I haven't done anything wrong here. I'm happy to tell my side of the story. Just like Hillary Clinton put up with 11 hours of Benghazi testimony, I can do the same. They're not going to break me. They're not going to discover anything. I'll go. It'll be a big waste of time, but I'll go. That would be an answer, and he can still give that answer. And I just sort of thought, to me, I'm gonna let this go for now. It's not because it was a fine answer. It's not because it was the right answer. It's not because he didn't make trouble for himself and for Democrats elsewhere that we didn't need with a dumb answer. It's just that I thought, the weekend is going to sort this thing out. And Twitter has that weird thing going on where, he says an initial thing, and then for 15 hours people complain about that initial thing, and then he clears it up, but then the initial complaints about the initial thing continue to circulate for the next 24 hours, and then people don't find out about the retraction or the step back. I just didn't want to contribute to it. It was wrong, it was dumb, but you didn't need me to tell you that. That's what I mean. And welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a brief 1-minute break. Okay, I think we wrapped it up there. That's the way I feel about the Joe Biden comments. If you were following Armando on Twitter, you would have heard all of the criticism that needed to be leveled. I just didn't really want to let that occupy much time during my weekend, but it's all correct. This is one of those situations where I thought, he said a dumb thing, and his lawyers will fix it, and they'll likely never subpoena him anyway, and so he won't even really ever have a real life opportunity to straighten out before the body what he really meant by all of that, because there will end up being no witnesses after all anyhow. But there you have it. So, he shouldn't have said that. He should have said it the other way, and he didn't say it the other way. And now most of America will have forgotten it. The people who, realize that it was absolutely a ridiculous thing to say will never let go of it, and they shouldn't, but pocket it and use it strategically from here on in. And it's not going to, you can complain all you want. It's Twitter. It can't stop you from doing that. And after all, you're correct. So that's about it that I've got on that. All right. Let's see. Brief update. I am told via SV Date, tweeting a new golf update for today. Trump is at, of course, Pervalago in Palm Beach this weekend and all of this week. He's doing a 2-week stay. He has now spent 234 days on a golf course that he owns in his 1,074 days in office. So that's about a quarter of the days in office on one of his golf courses. It's his 69th day. Nice, everybody can say. 69th day at his course in West Palm Beach. Taxpayer paid golf tab now up to an estimated $118.3 million, according to SV Date's calculations at the HuffPost, as they now call it. Still catching on to that new name. And, take it or leave it. I mean, that's what we've got for you in terms of golf. I don't know if anybody out there still thinks that means anything to anybody, but I guess it could still have an impact on somebody. Every once in a while you get reminded. You see there was a video compilation circulating. Oh, now note to self time. Video compilation. I don't think I'll ever come up with this one. You've probably seen it, and I don't know if it proves anything to you. Maybe we can get by without it. But video of all the times Trump on the campaign trail insisted that he'd never play golf. And he didn't have any time for it. And, of course, the incessant criticism of Obama for golfing too much. And then you may have found out that Trump golfs more. And it's total hypocrisy. Now, what are you going to do with that? Nothing. But it is total hypocrisy. So there you go. That's what we have for this. Let's see. Is this why? I just saw another tweet go by. And is David Axelrod tweeting about one of the New York Times stories about, this is the one that Greg shared with us. So we don't have to take a pause at the moment to read it, but it might be one of the other long reads that we should do. But I think we all know all the facts behind the 84 days of conflict and confusion. But I do want to spend some time later today talking about on Twitter, I think, the idea of why Mulvaney would be left in those two positions, two very different positions, White House Chief of Staff and OMB Director. Ordinarily, not only jobs that are full-time and that one person ought not to hold at the same time, but it's been a long, long time since Mulvaney's been holding those two jobs. And I think this helps clear up some of the mystery of it. And it doesn't hurt to prime the public for understanding that keeping him in those two jobs specifically is part of the plan, part of the plot, and part of the growing body of circumstantial evidence for the claim that Donald Trump knew, it's hard to say Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing, but everything that he was doing was building towards this plot to extort Ukraine. And I don't know if it was something they came up with ahead of time for a plan for Mulvaney, but once he found himself occupying both positions, I think they found it extraordinarily useful to keep him there, and I think that became part of the plan. All right. Let's see. So we've got, we'll keep Twitter open, and I'll scroll back through my tweets to figure out what happened over the weekend and then pick up on some of the longer reads that it's time to share. Let's see. Also in the news today, I noticed the tweet of Seth Kotlar, Cotlar, as he points out in his Twitter bio. He teaches American history at Willamette University, and he had an interesting tweet this morning about everyone's favorite Florida man, one of the top Florida men out there, Matt Gaetz. This is an interesting piece, and let's see. Does he write on it at the Daily Beast, or is someone else writing on it? No, someone else is writing. Oh, it's Sam Stein together with the Sam team here. Sam Stein and Sam Brody writing the piece about which Seth notes, remember that time a white nationalist was outed by reporters? I remember a lot of those. Fired from the White House. Oh, so a very specific kind of white nationalist. Outed by reporters, fired by the White House, and then immediately given a speechwriting job by Matt Gaetz. Yeah, neither did I, says Seth, until now. That brings us to the story of Matt Gaetz hires speechwriter fired from White House over white nationalist conference. It's an old story, but I guess we didn't realize it until now, and I don't know what Matt Gaetz did in particular that brought this to anyone's attention, but it's true. And from back in April of 2019, Dr. Darren Beatty, I don't know how he pronounces it. Darren, you know how to spell it, but Beatty is Beattie. Could be Beatty, could be Beatty, like Warren. But he was the guy we're talking about. He's the white nationalist. He was pushed out of the administration over his appearance alongside alt-right figures. Less than a year later, that's not all that immediate, he now has a new gig on the Hill. And, of course, it's for overt white nationalist and noted drunkard Matt Gaetz. So no surprise there that he's become all of a sudden the big alt-right congressional superstar, and that's because they took the white nationalism that got him fired from the White House and injected it straight into the veins of drunkard Matt Gaetz, and lo and behold, it has boosted his fortunes. In right-wing circles, it makes sense to take the white nationalist cast-offs and make sure that they not only land on their feet, but land on their feet in your office so that you can echo Donald Trump talking points even before they become Donald Trump talking points, and get yourself on TV and get yourself invited to the White House. That's kind of the way that cycle works. Let's see. Other things that came across the Twitter transom. Yes. Why not run down a few of the latest tweets from the weekend into Monday? Joan McCarter tweeting yesterday, an old tweet that I guess I saw somebody re-inject into my timeline. She was reacting to the Glenn Kirshner tweet. Glenn Kirshner, his name we've called before, and he's a TV guy on NBC, MSNBC, as an analyst all the time. What else is in his background? All sorts of things. If you want to take a look at his Twitter bio, legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, spent some time in Army Judge Advocate General's office as well. What did he say, and why is he saying it? I guess this comes from, what the hell's today? December 30th. That's right. So yesterday around 6 p.m. No turning the other cheek this time. This is actually part of a Twitter thread. Well, let's go see where he begins. See, I have to trace the provenance of everything, but that's a dangerous thing to do on Twitter because it's always somebody else's tweet. I wanted to talk about what Jones said. I'm now talking about Glenn Kirshner. Maybe I'll just stick to that. And he was saying, no turning the other cheek this time. The critics and ideologies, I guess meant ideologues, will cry foul, claiming it's political vindictiveness, but it's not. It's holding criminals accountable at the first available opportunity when our country once again has a law-abiding president. Are we talking about, well, now I do need to fill in the background. I guess prosecuting Trump when he's out of office, however it comes about. Glenn's comments start this way. Come January 2021, a year from not tomorrow, but the next day, there will need to be a commission established, although it'll actually take 20 days into 2021 to get there. There will need to be a commission established to investigate and prosecute Trump. Sounds familiar, right? His co-conspirators and those who covered up his crimes, including elected officials who declared Trump committed no crime, knowing full well Trump did, in fact, commit crimes against the U.S. And that's when he starts to lay out the legal case for charging him with various crimes. And there are many. And it's very interesting, I think, to spend some time with Glenn running down what some of those crimes are, but not necessary right now. Anyway, just laying out the case that you can't let bygones be bygones. We can't say for the good of the country, we'll let this go. If Trump is impeached or resigns or whatever, or is voted out of office, that's not going to be a good excuse for letting it go. Joan then stepping in to say, let's see if we learn from history. Having done nothing to make any Bush administration officials answer for lying us into war, for illegal domestic surveillance, for torture, brought this. What happens when electeds are treated as if above the law? It's worse the next time. Certainly a lesson we've been trying to impart for a long time, something we tried to impart during the George W. Bush administration, and something we tried to impart to Democrats who would have at that point have been in position to impeach George W. Bush, but they didn't for various reasons. And a lesson we tried to impart during the Obama administration to Obama officials to say you should not let what Bush has done just become bygones, or it will become worse the next time. So I explicitly carried that message directly to the president and his then chief of staff, and various others, including the then Attorney General of the United States, and, they didn't like hearing that message. They were not too keen on that. I don't know whether they didn't believe it or whether they didn't want to listen to a blogger say it or it wouldn't matter who said it. Maybe a little bit of both. It probably wouldn't matter who said it, and they also didn't want to hear a blogger say it. So they didn't listen to a blogger say it, and he was right. And anyway, so Joan making the good point here. We got to work on learning this lesson. I do believe we had some impact with that lesson, with that line. It's this. We are now in that situation. We do now have the very next Republican president, as promised, did everything and more to make this situation worse, as predicted. And we don't have a Democratic administration to test whether presidents have learned this lesson or not. But we do have a Democratic House of Representatives to test whether or not that message has gotten anywhere. And I think that we have. And here's why. When we were facing George W. Bush and his crimes with a Democratic House, and even, I can't recall what the balance was in the Senate, whether it was still a Republican Senate at the time. I'm just losing track of when it flipped back and forth, or even if we had a Democratic Senate. What we didn't have was 67 votes to impeach Donald Trump. Well, we certainly didn't have that then because Donald Trump wasn't president. However, I feel certain if you had asked around then, there would be a lot less resistance to impeaching Donald Trump at the time because everyone, well, I don't know, not everyone hated Donald Trump then, but it wouldn't have been so important because it wouldn't mean anything. But anyway, it was George W. Bush. We didn't have 67 votes to remove, to be precise, thank you, George W. Bush from office. And so the situation was, as Joan lays out here, we had lying us into a war, illegal domestic surveillance, torture, et cetera, et cetera. And there were other things as well. Scooter Libby and the plot by the vice president to out important intelligence assets. We were playing in that area again, just as we are now with the whistleblower law. And the outing of the whistleblower. But it didn't matter. And it didn't matter in precisely this way. In the House, when we pressured, those of us who were behind, such a drive, pressured people, approached people about, you got to impeach Bush. He's committed these high crimes and misdemeanors. Something has to be done. We have to lay out a marker. The answer was, we don't have the votes. Not that we didn't have the votes in the House. We may not have had the votes in the House to get articles of impeachment adopted, because like this time around, there were people who thought that the politics of it was detrimental. And Nancy Pelosi would almost certainly have been counted among them then, as she was up until very, very recently in this Congress with this president. But that was an excuse, and it prevailed last time around. We don't have the votes in the Senate. And because he won't be removed, there's no point in going forward with the impeachment. And the argument back was, that's not really the issue that I'm talking about. We're talking about laying down a marker that says this sort of thing is impeachable by definition. And we had a much better opportunity of doing it then, because we hadn't yet, not quite yet, moved into the Trump era nihilism of there is no such thing as against the law for a president. Not that hadn't been floated before. We hadn't gotten, I guess, we did have that. What we didn't have was a clear picture of what it would be like for a White House and an administration to deny the facts surrounding it. So obviously that we have all seen you do this thing. We didn't do that thing. This is, against the law and you can't do this. Well, not only is it unconstitutional to say that the president who does things, that any of them are against the law, but we didn't even do those things. We just deny those facts flat out. It was a perfect phone call. We didn't know exactly how far they would go to fight on the factual existence of evidence yet, but we did know that they would revive the Nixon doctrine and say that when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. That was I'm frustrating myself. This was an explicit warning during the George W. Bush administration and immediately following the George W. Bush administration, where, okay, fine, politically you don't want to consider impeachment, even though you can impeach an official who has left office. I can show you that, but nobody's going to buy into that. I understand it. But prosecutions after the fact, Truth Commission, whether you want that to be your model, I don't know if that's really going to work in this country or not. Arguable about whether or not it really worked anywhere. But it was an interesting thing to watch happen. But it was explicit warning. George W. Bush, Republicans in general, we had the same fight even then that we're having now. Well, it's not really, didn't begin with Trump. The Republicans of today weren't born yesterday. They've been doing this since forever. Trump is a symptom of what's been going on in the Republican Party, not the cause of it. And we still debate that with people. But that Republicans explicitly sought and have sought since it happened to relitigate Watergate. They fully believe that Watergate was decided wrongly. And it all comes down to the Nixon doctrine, which we thought the country rejected forever after because he resigned and then he was pardoned and it's healing for the nation. And everybody thinks of Dick Nixon as as the impeached president, even though he wasn't, etc. But that he'd been disgraced and his doctrine had been disgraced and had been exposed forever by the Frost interviews. And everybody recognized that that was crazy from the start and always would. And they should have, but for an active program among Republicans, top men. And it was almost all men. Now, of course, it's been taken over by Cheney's daughters largely. But, to revive that doctrine and to say that it hasn't been disproved and he wasn't ever impeached after all. And maybe that's why it's so important to them to cling to this with Donald Trump. But there were establishment and moderate and whatever squishy adjectives you want to attach to it, Democrats who were otherwise good Democrats, good people, great legislators, great leaders, great presidents, what have you, didn't really want to get into that. It was just, I don't know whether it was too much for them or they thought you're a Cheeto munching idiot blogger, so I don't have to listen to you. You can't possibly be right. Or it was just too complex a subject and too dark a subject, or maybe because they were, if not directly, if they were, do you want to blame it on boomers and being a boomer? Maybe, maybe. But there were certainly several generations of Democrats who came up believing that's it. The Nixon resignation is the stain on that doctrine that can't come back. Everyone knows the president isn't above the law. And indeed, everyone does run around saying that as if they do believe it. And it was a crazy idea to think that some obscure idiot congressman from Wyoming was going to be able to change that. And he didn't do it by himself. It was a big program to relitigate Watergate. And it was immediate. But it certainly became obvious pretty quickly, by the, I don't know, whatever. It should have been obvious to more people earlier. But, the fact that there was such an effort, for instance, where it was immediately spotted? Go ask Empty Wheel. She'll tell you where it was immediately spotted, right? In the minority views on the Iran-Contra investigation. It was obvious from there because Dick Cheney was in Congress for it, right? I think, and he led the effort, as I recall, to finally formalize the Republican position in the minority report to the Iran-Contra investigations that, Watergate was wrongly decided. They were attacking the notion that it was somehow crazy to say when the president does it, it's not illegal right away. And every front, all the Watergate reforms, I think we've actually been through this, even on the radio, right? That, immediately one of the outgrowths of Watergate reforms was campaign finance law, the Federal Election Commission, and all of its rules that grew out of, backlash against the way that the committee to reelect the president operated, et cetera, et cetera. And they've been pushing back on that since forever, mostly because it would clamp down on their style of doing business. But they've been pushing against that. All the McConnell's role in the whole money equals speech fight against the direction that legislators initially hoped the campaign finance laws would take was undermined and destroyed by the argument that McConnell and others made, and the judges that they've placed on the bench since, that money is speech and it can't be regulated without implicating the First Amendment, or it can't be curtailed without undermining the First Amendment. And, there's an argument to be made for it, but I didn't think it was going to become the controlling argument. And it has, just the same way as we've described on the air, that we didn't think the fringe view that the Second Amendment means, despite all the discussion of well-regulated militias, meant that it really was a personal right to go about armed in daily society. But they pushed that argument enough and numbed enough of us to it and placed enough judges on the courts that poof, all of a sudden, once again, that's where I drew the terminology for poof, we were all proved pre-wrong all the time that we thought we understood what the Constitution's dictates really meant. It turns out we were wrong the whole time and didn't know it. And it wasn't that minds were changed, it's that weaker minds were appointed to the Supreme Court and were able to simply say, well, we like guns, and so therefore we're going to come to this conclusion. And that's all there was to it. Legal reasoning be damned. So, all right, it's been a long-term project. And like I said, I do think that we have changed, to some extent, democratic thinking in the legislature. Because during the George W. Bush administration, after all of this fight, all of these pushes that the Republicans have made for years and years to overturn the idea that the president isn't above the law, came to fruition very early. And we saw it, and the hope was that Democrats would understand right away what we needed to do about it. But instead, the answer was, well, we don't have the votes. If we can't remove him, then it's moot. So we won't impeach if they won't remove. It doesn't make any sense. We don't want to take that risk. Of course, we had been conditioned for several years immediately prior to this that George W. Bush was in this unassailable position, and that our attempt to impeach him, particularly if it was over torture or illegal surveillance or lying us into war, we were still under the pall of, if you don't support the war, you support the terrorists. And, they're still in this defensive crouch. So they weren't going to impeach him over it, especially if it wasn't going to do anything. And so even though we made the argument, if you don't lay down this marker, if you don't impeach, even despite knowing that, quote, we don't have the votes in the Senate. First of all, you never know how a Senate trial is going to play out. But, we're learning that maybe we do have some idea how it was going to play out. And they would just fix the rules, but maybe they didn't have control. I don't remember who controlled the Senate at that point. But they rejected the idea that you could lay down a historical marker early. And as I was saying here, at that time, we might have had a fighting chance to come away from the results, even without removing George W. Bush from office, to say, well, all right, we didn't remove him from office, but now everyone will know that this is impeachable. And hopefully, we thought maybe rational Republicans in the future won't want to risk impeachment. And if we lay down that line, they won't want to cross it. So we were wrong on that one. There would eventually be, right away, the very next Republican president would be willing to cross those lines, even if we laid them down in no uncertain terms. So that's where we were wrong. But what I meant to get to here was our argument with George W. Bush was, yes, we don't have the votes, but it doesn't matter. The exercise that's important here is laying down the line. And this time, we also don't have the votes, right? Isn't that what everybody's talking about? So nothing has changed there. The only thing that's really changed in the composition of the key leadership in Congress that would have dealt with an impeachment is the removal from the picture of John Conyers. And of course, you can't argue in any way that John Conyers was the stumbling block to impeachment, unless you want to say, well, we didn't think he should have been competent, but he's not competent to have handled the thing. But Pelosi, still in her position, she heard the arguments last time around, and Jerry Nadler heard those arguments last time around. And as a matter of fact, Jamie Raskin heard and even made those arguments last time around, even though he wasn't in Congress at the time. And now, we don't have the votes, but they did it anyway. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. So much to catch up on, of course. Now may be a good time. I think we've made our point, right? We might as well just restate it all at once in case we got cut off on the way into break or something. But basically, I do think that the campaign that we, many of us participated in, I certainly participated in directly, staged to advocate for the impeachment of George W. Bush, even though we didn't have the votes, has had some dividends. And I guess I still need to clear this part up. But I think that perhaps, in part, we may have created a more receptive audience among some key leadership people, and they may not even remember it necessarily. But I think we had some impact in discussing impeachment with them under the George W. Bush administration. The answer was we don't have the votes. But Jerry Nadler was, even then, the chair of the Constitution Subcommittee on Judiciary. And he was actually ended up being, he was initially resistant to it, along with Nancy Pelosi and everybody else, to the idea of impeaching Bush. And I think in describing and thinking back about what the political atmosphere was, then you can see why it was just a bad idea, but you can see why they might have come to that conclusion. But Nadler eventually came around to at least admitting in discussion behind the scenes that this was a position that made sense. I see what you're getting at. I don't think that the votes exist in the House right now because the votes never will exist in the Senate. And so you will find a lot of resistance there. But you make a good point. This is something that really needs to be marked out here. This idea of the unitary executive and the expansion of imperial presidential power and to operate essentially above the law in all of these areas is problematic. It does need to be called out. But I don't sit in a position where I'm able to make the case that it's worth having me continue to push against a reluctant leadership and Democratic House caucus to get them to stick their necks out on an impeachment vote that we know isn't going anywhere. Well, we're likewise told that this impeachment vote isn't going anywhere, though it's been held. I mean, we have that going for us, but that the, process of removal isn't going anywhere. And we all understand why, but it's the same actors largely. Pelosi was speaker then and is speaker now. Have circumstances changed? Yeah, you can argue that they have because Ukraine, but the there's no reason to believe that we don't have the votes couldn't still be an operative excuse. Why hasn't it been? It was for a while. Why, though it wasn't explicitly used this time either. And that may be because the weakness of it was exposed. Yes, I know we don't have the votes, but you said that last time, and and we were right last time too. They might answer and say, well, that's great. Now we're all right because we told you that whether you have the votes or not isn't the issue. It was whether or not you lay this out as impeachable or not, which is the issue. And you didn't. And we said that would result in the same and worse from the next Republican president. And it has. So now what? And the position of the House under Nancy Pelosi has changed from we don't have the votes, despite the fact that we still don't have the votes, to, well, we don't have a choice, which is what our position was last time. I know you don't have the votes, but you don't have a choice. This is too serious to let go. And so now, for whatever reason, whatever combination of facts and arguments and reasons and circumstances we were facing, whatever it is, the new House leadership position, and we can write this down, mark this down as an accomplishment, I guess, right? A progressive accomplishment. We've finally convinced them that there are circumstances under which we don't have a choice is the correct answer to we don't have the votes. That's a thing. We did that thing. I'm proud of that. I put that down, quite honestly, just now. It should be, if it would work, I could put it down above. But it will end up not working because Republicans are liars and hypocrites and traitors. It will come in just below, I guess, the filibuster reform. Where, we started that out and everybody said, that's not how it works. And then we worked it to the point where they realized that is how it works. And then they did this thing. And although I still continue to see people, who I otherwise respect, say things like, well, that's why, you ended up ruining the courts. You enabled Trump and McConnell to appoint what is now approaching 1 in 4 of every federal judges having been appointed by Trump, although it's really closer to 1 in 5. I've seen there's some mixing up of the statistics there. I think people confusing the stats by confusing the difference between the federal judiciary at large and the circuit courts. And I think that it's nearing about 1 in 4 circuit and Supreme Court, appellate judges, 1 in 4 or so, appointed by Trump, which is a remarkable number, no matter how you slice it. And then it's getting confused and announced that 1 in 4 federal judges were appointed by Trump. It's close. It's about 1 in 5 federal judges appointed by Trump, but the appellate courts are not the same as the judiciary. There's about in the 100s. I forget what the numbers. I think it's like 179 for some reason. Appellate judicial seats in the United States, but 600 something district court judges. Don't forget that they're out there. So while it's 1 in 4 of the appellate judges have been appointed by Trump, that's diluted by the full body of all the federal judiciary, in case you have to ever parse this point with anybody. You won't. Don't worry about it. But what the hell were we saying again? Oh, yes, right. Well, anyway, the point really was that when we made this argument to people the last time around, the big roadblock excuse, we don't have the votes, which was never operative for us, has since been swept away. Pelosi is still Pelosi. Why did she change her mind? I don't know. But she did. Nadler is still Nadler, but now he's a much more important person. Now, though we were able to convince a few years ago the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee that that was true, that was likely to become even more obviously true in the near future, that didn't matter because who cares about convincing a subcommittee chair? Jamie Raskin, who I mentioned, wasn't even in Congress at the time, but he was a state legislator in Maryland. That doesn't happen to play into this. But what I mean was, that's what he was involved in politics, but he joined in the call for an impeachment of George W. Bush as well, and for largely the same reasons. And then a person who had come to understand that argument, that we don't have the votes, ought to have been trumped even at the time with we don't have a choice, or he gave us no choice. In this case, the he being the George W. Bush. But he carried that understanding with him to Congress, to arrive in Congress as someone who was in a position to be a major ally to Jerry Nadler when the time came. So that's what I'm saying. We made that happen, and I guess the tangent there was that it comes in just below filibuster reform as an accomplishment in changing the dominant thinking of Democratic office holders on the federal level. We went into the filibuster reform fight with everyone against us and saying that wasn't how it works. And now we do have the reaction of people saying, well, because you showed everyone how you could change the filibuster rules by majority vote, then that gave license to McConnell to do the same, and then they used that to pollute the federal courts. But even at the time, when we had this initial argument, people did say, well, if you do change the rules this way, Republicans will be able to change the rules this way when they get in a majority. And if there's a Republican president, then you're going to pollute the federal judiciary. Yes, and we understood that then, and we said, yeah, here's the thing. This idea doesn't come from progressive Democrats necessarily. They didn't invent this thing, although if you look far enough back in history, everything changes, right? If you look a little further back, there were many progressive Democrats who were involved in formulating this operation. But one, history also will demonstrate for you that this operation that they used to change the rules by a bare majority always existed. That the most recent example of it having been used in the Senate had somehow been forgotten, but dated back to no earlier than the period of the 50s through the 70s, where the same argument was being made and the same procedure was being proposed, was finally executed in about 1975. But, somehow people had forgotten about it, and that it had most recently been revived by Republicans who threatened, beginning in about 2004, to be rid of the filibuster, or at least be rid of the filibuster with respect to federal judgeships in 2004 when they announced it and named it the nuclear option. So it doesn't require any kind of imagination at all to counter the argument that, well, Republicans will do this when they're in the majority. I know, because they just threatened it like 2 years ago. Where do you think I was in all of this? Asleep like you? No, I was watching. Did I oppose their proposal to do so at the time? Yes, because at the time the understanding was that although this was something that had been done in the past, this was no longer territory onto which senators were willing to wander. It would take extraordinary circumstances to get them to change their minds about those things. That's what they were telling us was the case. And so I said, all right, that being the case, then fine, hold firm and protect the use of the filibuster with respect to federal judges, or everything for that matter. But, then it becoming obvious that, well, look, Republicans were determined to do this, and they could make the argument that it would be valid if they did. Then I said, all right, well, you know what? Surely when Republicans were threatening it, someone somewhere, although maybe this just isn't the Republican mindset, someone somewhere must have said to the Republicans, well, if you do this in 2004 or 2005 with a Republican majority, then Democrats will one day be in the majority and they'll do it to you. And so you shouldn't do it, because if you do, then you'll give Democrats the idea that they can do it back. But it's too late. Once you float the idea and Democrats read it and evaluate it, well, then the chances are that they will think to do it to you, because this is the tit for tat. We shouldn't do it because Democrats will do it back to us, tit for tat. Okay, well, maybe you're right. We will. And guess what? The threat of using the same procedure against you almost immediately as soon as Democrats took back the White House and the Senate is exactly the reason you should never have floated this in the first place. And, well, you were right. You predicted it, and here we are. The tit for tat wasn't that McConnell did this as soon as he got a majority back under the Trump administration. We're now on the third iteration of this since 2004, not the second. Right? So anyway, a lot of people who are blaming the flood of Trump judges on Reid changing the rules in 2013 forget just how long that fight had been going on. Forget just how clearly we said, yes, we understand that Republicans will do this when they get the majority. They will also do this when they get the majority, even if we don't do this now, because this is something they've been itching to do since 2004. They came this close to it last time, and the key blockage to their going ahead and doing it was, at that time, senators like Susan Collins and Lindsey Graham and John McCain. How do you feel about them standing in the way of that now? Oh, yeah, they won't do that. One of them can't. They're not likely to help us at all, as a matter of fact. Yeah, right, exactly. So, yeah, to an extent, it's possible that we made it easier for them. But in the meantime, dozens of those federal bench seats were filled by Obama. There were dozens more that went unfilled, 100 plus, as a matter of fact, unfortunately, because, we didn't go full bore with what we could have done to fix this thing. We made some kind of stupid compromise. Now, this was a stupid compromise that came back and bit us in the ass, not the rules change. We could have filled all those seats. But why didn't we? Because Republicans will treat us with respect if we treat them with respect. That was the mistake, not changing the rules. So anyway, I thought I would spend some time explaining that. But ate up more time than I thought it should have, but an important point. Anyway, I guess really it is an important thing for us all to realize that, sometimes this banging your head against the wall opposition to the establishment, whether it's Republican, Democratic, or bipartisan establishment that just says, that's not how it works. You can't get this done. Sometimes you can. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out in exactly what you wanted, but again, we don't have the votes was overcome in time for this crazy maniac. Even though it doesn't produce the votes, at least we produce the marker. Now we'll get to see whether that makes any difference in the future, at the very least. And you can't change the rules that way went by the wayside too. Democrats in Congress, there are more of them, and those that are there are better. And that was supposed to be the long-term project, right? And the long-term, rallying cry, I suppose, of the Daily Kos thing from the very beginning, right? We got more and we got better. So I'm here to tell you that I don't know whether the radio show is necessarily doing it, but I do note for the record that since the start of the show, those things have caught on like wildfire among the ranks and the rank and file and Democrats in federal office. I think there were some other things at play too, but that happens to be the case, even though the groundwork was laid long before the radio show ever began. But let's credit the radio show, because then people will donate and we'll have money and we can do these things. I mean, these things do take up a lot of time, and I will tell you that the grand total of how much did I make on the impeachment push for George W. Bush? $0. How about the filibuster reform? Well, there was slightly more money in the offering for that. We were able to get a small stipend set aside for a period of months to help operate in that arena, and we have Darcy Berner, by the way, to thank for that one. I think I've explained that in the past too. There is no cash in this line of work. So it's a difficult thing to do full time. That's the way it really needs to be done. I mean, both jobs required at some point putting down the blogging keyboard, dressing up in a monkey suit, as they say, and going down to Congress and putting yourself in front of them face to face and making the argument traditional style, the old inside-outside routine, as Darcy taught us to call it. And it's years in the making, I guess, years in the offing, but it does work. It's just not something you can do all the time and feed a family, which is sad because there's plenty of money out there. It just takes more work to convince Democratic donors to fund something than, ironically enough, than it does to change the minds of the Democratic lawmakers who you're aiming at in the first place, at least on certain subjects. So that's something to chew on as well. All right. Moving on to the many other things that we ought to be considering. Let's depress you with something else. Why not leave things on a depressing note, because that'll get you coming back for tomorrow. We'll uplift you again. I don't know. That's the theory. Rolling Stone magazine. Jamil Smith. A real downer, but a realistic look at things. Sorry to do this to you at the end, but this has to be read. The Tulsa Massacre warns us. Yeah, it's depressing enough, the Tulsa Massacre. But by the way, has it not been fascinating how much attention the Tulsa Massacre has gotten because of television show, right? The Watchmen. I would imagine solely responsible for reviving interest into Tulsa Massacre, pushed on by some great scholarship along the way. But just, by the way, showing the power of television to do things like that. See also my dream that one day televisions and movies will, just as they taught everybody about their Miranda rights, teach them how to properly unload a semi-automatic firearm. But we don't have time for that. The Tulsa Massacre warns us, though, for something completely different, not to trust history to judge Trump on impeachment. That is a depressing thought, isn't it? America, a nation that is still digging up mass graves of massacred black people, that is true and in the news recently, fails too many tests of accountability to be trusted with the president's impeachment. True, which is why it should be in the International Court of Justice, but that's a tough nut to crack, too. Let me just read you Jamil's writing here and get done with it, shall we? White racists have long used bombing as a tactic, but they also dropped explosives onto black people from the air. That's true, and in case you forgot, there was also the move bombing along the way. You may have learned this recently from a popular television show. I doubt sincerely that you learned it in a high school history class. Probably right there. The kerosene bombing of Negro Wall Street, as Booker T. Washington initially labeled the prosperous Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, stands out even amid the maelstrom of violence in the opening scenes of Watchmen's premiere episode. When it aired, explainers and even curriculums abounded online to help people understand that what they had seen, as horrible as it was, wasn't fiction. Really needed to be done. The superlative HBO series, which expanded the universe of Alan Moore's seminal late 80s graphic novel, imagines a world in which that days-long 1921 massacre of black people in Tulsa sparked a series of events in the city that led to a reckoning 98 years later involving masked heroes and cops, a neo-Klan, two megalomaniac geniuses, and a fight for more power than any human can be trusted with. I don't think there's any particular spoilers in that, and I hope not, because I'm in the middle of it. Speaking of which, Damon Lindelof and the rest of the show's creators experienced only dumb luck when Donald Trump, the white nationalist president of the United States, became the subject of an impeachment inquiry during their run. The show offered a belated lesson on how the 1921 massacre manifested and later resonated throughout generations, much like an inherited cellular mutation. And it seems that the varied cruelties of Trump policy may experience something similar. More indirectly, though, the show is a reminder that history isn't some objective record carved into a stone tablet and preserved for all to judge objectively. History, when it isn't used to manipulate and intimidate, has often been insufficient at holding officials accountable. In that way, the manner in which Watchmen educated the public about Tulsa actually helped expose the folly of much of the rhetoric emerging from impeachment coverage. This is some good intersectional thinking, I think, here. This may be Richard Nixon's fault to an extent. I certainly told you I think so. Ironic, considering the Watchmen comic. The president who thwarted term limits in that world, the Watchmen world, remains soiled, by his crimes in this one, in the eyes of perhaps everyone but the Trump confidant Roger Stone, tattooed with Nixon's visage. I think Jamil underestimates the stain, or overestimates the stain here, I think. Underestimates the number of people who hold Roger Stone's view. History has been on the minds of journalists and other writers tasked with evaluating the impeachment story. Even Trump himself, in his raving pre-buttal letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi in advance of the House vote, wrote that, quote, history will judge you harshly as you proceed with this impeachment charade. And I write this letter to you for the purpose of history and to put my thoughts on a permanent and indelible record. A rare moment when Trump attempted to understand his true place in the chronicle of the American project. But this trope of history being the judge is common, particularly among those who feel that in a political environment in which Trump and Republicans seem to be able to behave badly without immediate consequence, the possibility of eventual repercussion reinforces an idea of America that ultimately makes this a land where justice prevails. As Michael Luo put it recently, it is tempting to say that Nixon's defenders wrote themselves an unalterable epitaph. It is tempting to assess Trump and the current Republican Party this way as well. As we speak, they are proudly boasting of strategies to exonerate the impeached president that involve them violating what would be their sworn constitutional duty, even while still laying claim to the mantle of patriotism. This is a person and a party who proudly deny history whenever it suits them, and yet we in the press and the public are hopeful that somehow, as in a piece of idealistic narrative fiction, history will win in the end and their lies will lose. But this is America. Have you met her? Trump and his party have a major cable network behaving like state-run media, as are some other elements of the press, if not financially, then politically. But as Republicans work to help the president get away with the misdeeds he has committed while in office and before, they do us an inadvertent service. They show us where history fails us and why it matters that Trump be made to pay as forcefully and as soon as possible. Ironically, it was more than 1,500 historians who demonstrated in a brief letter that they co-signed last week why this was important. Quoting the words of Alexander Hamilton, they warned that a president, quote, unprincipled in private life, desperate in his fortune, bold in his temper, and despotic in his ordinary demeanor, cannot continue in the office. Why wait for the historians for years hence to judge Trump when the case is so clear now? Yet still, we have seen educators more interested in whitewashing America than improving it. Incidents like the Greenwood Massacre are omitted from our textbooks, and students become adults without learning about moments incongruous with an idea of the exceptional America. It is no small wonder that so many grow up thinking that a Confederate legacy is something to be proud of, and white Southerners and Republican politicians alike still celebrate and defend the flag of slavery and traitors, even after it has been associated with terrorism against black people in present day. In fact, we even see universities like North Carolina at Chapel Hill pay millions to organizations that seek to protect racist statues, even if only to placate them. These are all regressive modes of thinking, ranging from celebrating willful ignorance of America's racist past to defending monuments designed to promote racial intimidation that Trump has long embraced himself. Defending a president like Trump, who is willing to defy the Constitution and threaten a foreign ally's security unless it interfered with U.S. elections on his behalf, should cost politicians their careers and reputations. However, that seems more like the realm of fantasy than anything the Watchmen creators conjured. The idea that history would somehow besmirch Trump in a way that the law never could is believed by not only his own behavior, belied by not only his own behavior, but that of the same people, practices, and institutions that he helps keep powerful. History itself tells us why it cannot be relied upon to issue a final judgment. The 1921 white terrorist rampage in Tulsa killed a few hundred black people if you only go by the official tally. However, survivors of the massacre maintain that the real total was in the thousands, and that several who went missing were buried in unmarked graves without ceremony. After weeks of searching, reports emerged on the day after the Watchmen finale in mid-December, indicating that forensic archaeologists had discovered anomalies in 2 locations consistent with the existence of mass graves. So there's a little bit more here, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the whole way through it. I do not know precisely how to hold Trump accountable. The New York State investigations into his family may yet bear fruit, and the Supreme Court, if it's still an independent body, will provide access to Trump's tax returns at last. But I know that the alternative, trusting history to condemn a lawless president sometime in the future, is for the birds. There's a concluding paragraph I only wish I could sneak in here, but I'll leave that for you to read on your own, depressing as it is. It's very interesting. Stay tuned now for more.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So do make sure you check into that final concluding paragraph. It's awfully foolish of me to have to abandon it at this point, but you know how the constraints of time are. We'll just have to leave it there. But of course, there's much more here on our programming day for Monday. Justice Putnam returns to the airwaves live next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Do stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.